Thursday, May 4, 1939. In Havana, Robert Hoffman was already being watched by members of 4 separate American intelligence agencies: the Secret Service of the U.S. Immigration Department, the FBI, and Naval and Military Intelligence. The most active of these was Colonel Ross E. Rawell of Naval Intelligence, who had been in Cuba for nearly a month, but whose secret reports to Washington were already being studied with special interest. Now, on May 4th, he returned to his small office in the American Embassy on the Avenida de Mil Sons to draft another communiqué. Its subject was a known Nazi woman courier who had arrived from the Panama Canal Zone to keep a trêve with Hoffman. Neither Rawell nor any of the other American intelligence officers in Cuba had authority to search or arrest a suspect. There was little point in enlisting the help of the indolent Cuban police. Bribery and persuasion allowed the Abwehr an almost free hand to use Havana as the center of their activities throughout North and South America. Virtually all Rawell could do was watch, listen, and report, but his reports left no doubts about the power of the Nazi spy ring on the island. Report SNR 23339 identified the Abwehr's strength in Havana as about 60 agents. Report R 30439 prefaced, "The source information, semi-reliable, subject Germany, intelligence ashore, contained an insight into Hoffman and his methods." The Nazi spy emerged as a cold man, well-versed in bribery and blackmail. Report R 23639, reliable, identified a key Abwehr agent as Julius Otto Ott, owner of the Swiss Home Restaurant in Havana. It is not known whether he is a Swiss or a German. He resides at Edificio Carreno, apartment 39. Ott is between 35 and 40 years of age, and is a humpbacked dwarf, being not more than 4 feet 5 inches in height. He has sandy complexion, is freckled, and sometimes wears glasses. Rawell knew that the woman courier who had delivered a packet to Hoffman was staying in Ott's apartment. She posed as a tourist and, as such, could move about freely without restriction. On previous visits to Havana, Rawell had tailed her to Ott's restaurant, a meeting place for European immigrants. He had identified, in the words of his report R 23739, again reliable, many of the dinners as high-powered Nazi agents camouflaged under the guise of Jewish refugees. He had also unearthed a nest of such spies living nearby in the Hotel Nacional and the Hotel Sevilla. Rawell had tapped their mail. Among other things, he discovered an Abwehr plot to buy 100 tons of glycerin in New York for sabotaging key American plants in the event of war. His tip resulted in the Abwehr men in New York being arrested. But the agents living in the Nacional and the Sevilla were immune from arrest, living out their cover as refugees, even to the point of seeking welfare aid from the local Joint Relief Committee. Rawell had cultivated the organization to build up a file on each bogus refugee waiting for his American quota number to come through. Once they entered the United States, they would be arrested. What Rawell didn't know on this human May evening, as he drafted his latest report to Washington, was what the package the woman delivered to Hoffman contained. Years later, an Abwehr source claimed the package held detailed drawings of the dams at Lakes Gatun and Pedro Miguel, source of all the water from the Panama Canal locks, plus a wealth of information about secret military installations that rendered them vulnerable to sabotage. That package, the source claimed, represented the most telling single blow the Abwehr had yet struck against the United States. The documents were to get to Germany by courier on the next Hapag ship, the St. Louis. In Hamburg, on the afternoon of May 4, Klaus Gottfried Halvorsen waited with some anticipation for the telephone connection to Paris. He would have to choose his words carefully, for as a result of the call, the voyage of the St. Louis would become public knowledge. How much of the background to the trip would it be wise to divulge? Halvorsen had received permission for the St. Louis special voyage from the Reichssicherheitsstabsrotend RSHA, a powerful government division destined to spawn the notorious Department 4B4, which, under the leadership of the 33-year-old up-and-coming bureaucrat Adolf Eichmann, would soon be responsible for the concentration, deportation, and extermination of Jews within the Reich and its occupied countries. Since early 1938, 4 Hapag ships had regularly carried to Shanghai and South American ports those allowed or forced out of Germany. The profits were considerable. Passengers had to pay for a return ticket to cover unforeseen eventualities. Once ashore in Chile or China, if they were lucky, they received a credit note stating that the return portion of their fares was lodged in a special account in Germany, which could be redeemed if they ever returned to the fatherland. Hapag did not expect to be required to repay the money. As his telephone rang to connect him with Paris, Halthison decided to say as little as necessary to the man at the other end, Morris Troper, the European director of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the Joint, one of the organizations responsible for helping the victims of Nazism. Halthison was wary of the American, whom he had never met but knew to have considerable connections in the United States and listening posts in a dozen European countries. More than anyone else Halthison knew, Troper was exceptionally well informed on events in Germany, and that, above all, made Halthison uneasy in his dealings with him. Halthison explained the special voyage to Cuba, adding that the St. Louis had been chosen simply because of her availability. She would carry, he continued, nearly 400 first-class passengers at 800 Reichslands a head and more than 500 tourist class at 600 Reichsmarks. All would be required to pay the customary contingency fee of 230 Reichsmarks for the return voyage in case of circumstances beyond Hapag's control. Tickets were being issued on a first-class come, first-served basis. Troper had only one question for Halthison. Was the line sure Cuba would accept such a large single consignment? The question alarmed Halthison. Had Troper heard something? He had not. The remark simply stemmed from the fact that nearly 1,000 emigrants on the St. Louis would be the largest number ever of refugees to land in Cuba at one time. Halthison insisted there was no cause for alarm, provided the usual precautions were enforced, no publicity, no violation of any Third Reich decree applying to immigrants. In practice, that meant each passenger would be allowed to leave Germany with only 10 Reichsmarks in cash, about $4 plus shipboard money, which they could purchase from Hapag up to the value of 230 Reichsmarks. This money could be spent only at sea and could not be converted back to Reichsmarks. Troper realized Halthison had sidestepped his question, but he decided not to press the matter. Theirs was a strictly working relationship, born out of the need of one of them to advance company profits and the desire of the other to save lives. Halthison ended the conversation with the words, "You know our motto, you travel well with the Hamburg America line." Morris Troper was both elated and depressed by news of the voyage. There would be no problem in filling the St. Louis with these who were financed by hidden money, contributions sent from relatives outside Germany, and even help from ordinary Germans. But it would require Hapag's entire fleet to satisfy the demands of all those desperate to get out of Germany. Yet the majority would be prevented by leaving by the simple need of money. After 6 years of being crowded into ghettos and charged exorbitant rents, their profits confiscated by the state, their professional services rejected, the resources of most were exhausted. They could not even raise the basic passage money, let alone the cash for all the other dues. Morris Troper cabled the head office of the American Joint Distribution Center Committee in New York. The joint would undoubtedly help the immigrants find their way in the New World. News of the forthcoming voyage was received with satisfaction, and the joint immediately made it known to a number of interested American organizations, among them the President's Advisory Committee on Refugees. It would ensure that the voyage did not come as a surprise to President Franklin Roosevelt. In London, Sir Herbert Emerson, newly appointed director of the International Committee on Political Refugees, also learned of the voyage from Morris Troper. Emerson's committee was virtually the only positive outcome of the much-mooted Avian Conference of almost a year earlier. The initiative for the conference had come from President Roosevelt himself. Its purpose was to coordinate emigration from Europe. The hope was that the 32 countries attending would be willing to relax their immigration policies, but the United States, to whom the world looked for leadership, had shown itself unwilling to put into practice the principles which led Roosevelt to suggest the conference in the first place. America would allow all the places on its German quota to be used. The concession, which required no change in existing United States laws, meant that the entire German quota of 25,957 would be made use of each year, but that still did not mean they would all be German Jews. The Intergovernmental Committee had first established its offices in London under an elderly American director, with a mandate to negotiate with Germany. In late 1938, the president of the Reichsbank, Germany's financial wizard, visited London with a plan. During the 3 years, 150,000 refugees would be allowed to emigrate in return for a loan of 1.5 billion Reichsmarks to be provided in foreign currency by a corporation financed by International Jewry. Negotiations were prolonged. Hitler became disenchanted with the Reichsmark Bank president and dismissed him. Göring appointed his own nominee to negotiate. In February 1939, the American director of Intergovernmental Committee tendered his resignation, and in April, Sir Herbert Emerson had taken his place. One of the first delegations with whom Emerson had to deal came from Germany, with a message from the Gestapo. Unless a settlement for the proposed 150,000 was established quickly, German authorities would return to the shock tactics so successful in ridding Germany of the Jews in the past. Emerson replied that he would not allow the Gestapo to dictate what my committee will or will not do. The delegation returned to Germany empty-handed. Now, as Emerson considered the news of the St. Louis voyage, he came to the conclusion that it could do little but complicate the delicate negotiations he was conducting. While the trip would provide respite for a few, it might well boomerang against the many remaining in Germany. This view was confirmed when Emerson took a phone call from the principal private secretary to the British Foreign Secretary. The secretary read to the director a message recently received from the British consul in Havana. If the contents were correct, the St. Louis and its passengers would become the excuse for a Nazi propaganda campaign. Sir Herbert Emerson decided the matter could not be left to run in its course.